over the weekend. And I'm now actually producing to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So my new Facebook profile is actually receiving this.
Okay, is it a better service? You get a new internet, wait, a new internet provider?
A new internet provider, yeah. I yet to know whether it's better, cheaper.
It is cheaper
It's
though, eh?
supposed to be better because it's actually higher speed than
Oh,
the
okay.
prior one.
Actually, I got a good break for a couple of years. The year I moved in here, as they were going around door to door at my old house and offered me a sensational deal, which I couldn't believe. And I when I moved in here, then I phoned the phone. It was Kojiko. And I phoned them, and they said, "Yeah, there was a special offer that they do when they go around door to door." And I got a sensational offer. Of course, it was only for 2 years, and I'm paying the same as anyone else now, probably. But
Yeah.
uh,
Well, you got to go. You got to update yourself every once in a while. And I couldn't believe how easy this was to put in. It literally, it arrived. We got it Saturday morning from the post office. It was a 10-minute install job. Easy
oh,
peasy. Good morning, Mike Cushman.
good morning, Metaphysical Mike.
Right. So it's one of these stories. I sent it to you. Can't see much of it. Woman has a job application returned 48 years after sending it. Apparently, she moved a number of times in the meanwhile. It's not like she stayed in the same address. And she basically got this job application sent back to her, 48 years later. Apparently, she was applying for a job as a stunt woman
She
in the
moved 50 times.
1970s.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
moved 50 times in 48 years, and yet the post office was able to track her down, even if it took them 48 years. That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. But why didn't they deliver? I think the world missed a stunt lady there. That's for sure.
Yeah, so in the articles it says she was a motorcycle stunt lady, and it has a picture of her sort of doing a jump on a motor with a motorcycle, and I guess she was kind of a itinerant because she moved around a lot, and I can imagine every time the post office got the mail back, would get a forwarding address, forward it, it would come back because she wasn't there, and because she kept moving, and finally I tracked her down, and I think
Once she
that's
stopped
kind of
moving, the
amazing.
mail got. Once she stopped moving, the mail got home.
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then finally, yeah. I guess was she got just too old to move around anymore, or maybe her motorcycle broke down.
Yeah. Maybe. All right. Moving on to more serious stuff. The engineers that um, uh, created the Welland condo that collapsed have been charged with endangering workers under the Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Yeah, this is finally we get and oddly enough, and of course this is for the EverTrust building,
Yeah.
built by EverTrust, uh, now named Never Trust. The new name from EverTrust to Never Trust, Upper Vista Welland condo. Now we've reported on this a couple of times how the buildings collapsed. Actually, there was two collapses in the building. So the engineers are being charged with endangering workers, uh, and I think this is a good thing. And I think it comes the it says here the Ministry of Labor said in an email the two were charged. There was two professional engineers August 15th under Section 31 bracket 2 as professional engineer did as a result of advice negligently or incompetently given endanger a worker or workers at the workplace. Now, I don't think it's being completely run through because their spokesperson, Joyce Morocco, who is our regional rep, and
Regional
she's
council,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, she's the spokesman for Never Trust, and she says they haven't even heard much about it yet. This was a surprise to her, and there's still an ongoing investigation onto what's happening. And finally, there's an ongoing investigation, but construction has begun again. They had a trouble getting finance after all this happened, but they're up and running again. This is a terrible thing. I hope it comes down. Now they're going to do an investigation. I don't know if both engineers are going to be responsible. I don't know how the engineers are going to dodge and weave out of this one. It hasn't come to conclusion. It's before the courts, or about to be before the courts. I think it's delayed to December 12th. It should be interesting to see what they come up with. Now, obviously, there was reason for them to charge the engineers. If they can wiggle out of this, I don't know if they can. But this is not a criminal offense, and I wonder why. I mean, if they killed somebody, would it still not be a criminal offense? It's a criminal offense to put workers in danger. If they didn't get hurt from what they did, what difference does that make? It was the potential that these guys.
Is it the engineers? Is it the engineers, or is it the company that bears some guilt in this regard?
Yeah, I would say the company for sure, but wouldn't you think the engineers, if they did their job competently?
I would certainly think the engineers should be involved in it, but I would also say that the company as a whole should have some responsibility as well.
Of course. They are now, of course, the company would love to dump responsibility on the engineers and say, "Oh, we didn't know." Yeah, they definitely have to have some sort of responsibility because they're the ones that hired the engineers. And I don't know how that works in law. Maybe you do.
Well, it's just long one. I've long wondered about this one because we've had a number of incidents where where issues have occurred, and the same with this one. It looked like at the time that there was some cutting corners going on here, and I've seen a number of incidents that have resulted in deaths over the years because of cutting corners. And I wonder about cutting corners as to whether that kind of, there should be a charge out there of corporate manslaughter or corporate murder.
Well, I tell you, for somebody who worked 25 years of construction through the Millwright Hall in industrial construction, I can tell you when a job gets behind, the first thing that goes out the window is safety.
Yeah.
What they do when they start a brand new project, they have a safety man and he goes around and he finds a couple of violators and they make a big point of throwing them off the job. And yet that the same violations can happen dozens of times over later on when the job gets behind.
Yeah,
because the companies hire their own safety guys, and it's against their own interest to find safety violations. The ministry says it's up to the contractor or the company to hire their own safety people. But if you want to get another job with that company a little later on, right, you look the other way on safety issues. And I ran it as a steward. I ran into this a few times, and I don't know. That's the problem. And I think in this particular case, they were trying to do too much. I'm not sure they were cutting corners, but they were trying to put things together too quickly without doing they were doing things ahead of time instead of securing one part of the job and making sure it was done and then move on to the other. They're probably trying to do two things at once to save time, and that was the cause. But remember, Never Trust, Ever Trust, now called Never Trust, has had a problem on its other buildings too. Slipshod type of construction. And like when that first came up, they went to the other condos that this company had built and found a whole raft of things that the people that were living in them had problems with.
Yep.
And concerns for their own safety.
You know, those buildings might not collapse, but when they've got concerns about the safety of the certain parts of the building, you have to wonder, don't you? And you know, it's all too easy to shortcut on these things. Yet, in fact, you know, if people are going to live, if people are going to live there for the next 50 years, they've got to be safe.
Yeah, I can't really see this thing collapsing if they did things correctly, and I think this is the source of the problem. There was probably, as you said, they were cutting corners. That was probably part of it, and trying to do too many things at once, and probably not enough guys on the job as well. We don't even know if the guys on the job were competent laborers, but it doesn't really. In this particular case, they haven't found anything that the crew had done. Now, sometimes a crew will forsake what the engineers have told them to do and try to figure out a way of doing it differently. In this case, there doesn't seem to be anything like this. But this is an ongoing investigation, and I don't know where.
That's nothing new about, the people who design buildings. Often, when it comes to the actual construction, my dad used to do that. He was a commercial. He did commercial buildings, contracting and that for commercial buildings. So he's a bricklayer, and they often change the specs because the thing is, a couple of times they changed the specs because they didn't make sense. All right, they looked at the blueprints, they looked at the building that they were going to produce, laid it out on there, started building it, and then found there were problems with the building.
Oh, sure. I remember we had to put in a big drive shaft from a motor to a steel mill roll. And unfortunately, there was a huge column right in the way. It was the major support for the building, and the drive shaft went right through the middle, according to the plans. So they had to do a engineer's work around that column and fashion it in such a way. They had to cut into it and manipulate it so that it would retain its strength and yet make room for the drive shaft. But they did, and it was all engineered.
Kind of one of the stories he gave me is, for whatever reason, they didn't put in stairs between the first and second floor.
Yeah, there are all kinds of things like that. I was on a job in the canal, and I'm telling you, I had a couple of close calls on that job. And luckily, somebody got smart and phoned the ministry, and they came down, took an inspection, and shut the job down for a couple of days. And they had to bring in a professional scaffolder to make the scaffolds and everything. And they were really hot and mad about it. And they laid off the guy they thought they had called the ministry. I found out later that the guy they thought called the ministry did not call the ministry. It was actually a business agent for one of the trade unions that was very unhappy with the safety he saw on the job. But that's the risk that some workers take if they beak off about safety. Sometimes they might find a job. Guess what? We don't have enough job. And this guy was replaced like within days later. They called the hall and brought in another guy.
Yeah.
And the guy that they got rid of was an extremely good millwright. So to replace him was they didn't get the same quality of millwright when they replaced him, but it was the fact that they wanted to be vindictive and they wanted to show everybody that if you call out a safety problem, you're going to get bit. And that's another thing that workers have to worry about. And nowadays, and this is on a union job.
Yeah.
And this is, so you can imagine in a place like this, I imagine some of the workers that were there were probably pretty doubtful about how things were progressing. But if they aren't a union outfit and they've got a lot of new Canadians on board, they're very, very loath to speak up and then sacrifice their job in doing so. That's another thing I'm worried about with all this new construction going up. There's a lot of new Canadians working on it, and have they had the proper safety treatment, safety counseling? Do they know what they can do? Do they know what their rights are?
Yeah.
When I was down in Florida, if you looked at the workers, they used workers. Most of them were illegal on the building that I was staying on, and they were on a swing stage. I've told you this before. They looked good. They had the harnesses. They had everything. But on a closer inspection, it was an unsafe environment they're working in. And when I mentioned this, that those guys were at risk of falling from a swing stage, I was told it doesn't matter to the contractor. If somebody falls off that, they'll just go to the bus stop and get another one. And they don't have to even worry about what happens to the guy unless he dies or something like that, because they can wash their hands of him pretty quick because he's an illegal.
Mm. Well, that's okay. So a few comments here. People are going to leave in those homes, and they've endangered them all. Yeah, I agree.
They can't. Yeah, they can't go ahead. The building is under a microscope now, or at least we hope it should be under a microscope.
Oh, it should be.
More building inspection coming in. So I think probably the people that are going to live in that one can be assured they're going to live in a safe one, because they've had such a never trust cannot build a building now there that is unsafe, because they have everybody looking at them. So I think in that particular case, they're probably all right. I'm worried about the other ones they're building. If they've done these shortcuts here and they got away with them in other places, that's the ones I'm worried about.
Yeah, cutting corners. Let's talk about the Skyway when the scaffolding collapsed on the Skyway.
Yes, I remember that. Actually, I knew a guy that was working on that job, and 4 guys fell from the scaffolding. It wasn't built properly, and 4 guys lost their lives. Other guys were clinging on to wherever they could, as long as they could. I knew one of the fellas that was he said he was just holding on for dear life for hour after hour, and they finally were able to rescue him. But 4 guys dying off of scaffolding, that is just not acceptable ever. And you have to have professional scaffolders. Let me tell you, when I was on the job, when we built our own scaffolds, most of the time they were pretty good. But when you got a professional, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, they build the clamp and tube type scaffolding all over the place, and I was much happier when they were in there building those scaffolds for us, because they were just way better than we did ourselves. And I was normally when you're in construction, you don't want to give jurisdiction away to anybody. If you build your own scaffolds, you want to keep building your own scaffolds. But I was very pleased to see that job go out of my hands and go off to a professional, or the UBJ. because they really knew what they were doing. They were skilled at it, and they had been, and that was their job. Their primary job is building scaffolds, and they're fully trained in it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the scaffolds have to be engineered as well.
Okay, so Mike points out that our whole system relies upon policing rather than government enforcement.
Yeah,
Right?
especially with safety guys. When you hire your own safety guy, and there's no protection for that guy to be laid off or that woman to be laid off.
Mm. Right.
I mean, when I went on to jobs in bigger jobs, let's say in Ford or whatever else, they would hire students as safety people, and they didn't know what the hell they were doing. I mean, the ironworkers rigged up this thing that was completely unsafe, and when the safety girl come along, she said she didn't even know what she was looking at, and complained that some of the guys had been taken off their safety glasses. And that was a joke for a long time. It was like you're getting safety people on the job that don't even know what they're doing. I mean, you get an 18-year-old young lady walking up and down and telling people they're putting their hat on wrong, and meanwhile, there's all kinds of safety violations going on which she cannot recognize.
Oh yeah. Okay, so Gary makes a point where, Mike, when can we ever trust any kind of government policies? Maybe you want to, but there are many that too many to count
Right.
for me. Yeah.
Mike, when can we ever trust any kind of government policies? Maybe you want to, but there are many to count for me. Yeah, I don't think Mike is trusting anyone. Myself, Mike says they have a red tape to the point of endangerment. Yeah.
Cut
They
the
have,
red. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. There's a lot of reasons why these procedures are in place, and sometimes they overdo it.
Yeah.
And I know that for sure. Having been a steward on jobs many times, sometimes the safety is misplaced, where they have a very unsafe job on one side, but they're paying attention to one that's okay, but they're getting pedantic about it.
Yeah. All right. So there we go. And good morning to Chris Simone.
Right. Hello, Chris. How's it going, buddy? And yep.
Hi, okay, guys. 4th Avenue site is proof of lack of governance. Self-policing houses get built, cut red tape.
Yeah, I'm still not too happy about the 4th Avenue building housing that's going on there. I think it's just way too close to contaminated land. And I've never been comfortable with that. I've never been reassured that this is not the case. Although the councilors have given it the red light or green light, pardon me. I'm not so sure about that. And we found that Gary and Mike know all about that, and I've pointed that out multiple times.
Right, and Gary says, I remember the story before about that safety girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's more than one of them. Like, I mean, it was.
I'm sure. Yeah. And the thing is, somebody who's only done half a safety course isn't exactly your best safety inspector, are they?
No, but I give you, what the companies were able to get away with, where it was stunning. Sometimes I was on a job, and I had like 20 years experience in scissor lifts and other man lifts, and just about everybody I worked with did as well. They decided that we had to have some sort of formal training in the scissor lifts because some safety guy come along and said that. Well, they had all these like safety kids that had never been on a scissor lift at all or any other kind of man lift. And so they had a safety instruction for a scissor lift. and they had one guy standing on a scissor lift with the whole crews, all of them around, pointing out what button goes up, what comes down, and a few other things. And then everybody was to sign this paper to say that they'd been trained. It was laughable. And these kids that were there, safety kids, summer students, all signed that paper because they were there as well. And they were all issued a ticket. They were all issued a ticket. And the people, and a couple of guys I knew that weren't there that day, who had 20 years of experience on it, couldn't use the scissor lift thereafter because they missed the training. But somebody who had never been on one and even driven one had a card that said that they had been instructed on the use of the scissor lift.
I don't think that's right, because until I've actually been through it, I've figured out how to lift the mechanism, figured out how to lower the mechanism, figured out how to drive that thing around, maneuver it around. How can I be qualified to work on it?
That's my point exactly.
Yeah.
They had to prove that they have done some safety, some instruction on how to use scissor lift, and they hadn't had anything they could show. So they collected everybody all together and said, this goes up, this goes down, and this is how you get a guy down if they're stuck up there. And yet, and it wasn't exactly the safest workplace sometimes, because one of the guys I knew got jammed. He actually experienced scissor lift guy got jammed, and he got hurt when the scissor lift jammed him up against a beam beam. So here's an experienced guy who's had multiple years, and yet that kid, those safety kids there, those students had a card now that says they were qualified to drive do a scissor lift. It's insane. Like, seriously. Oh man. Yeah. I remember doing harness training. They said I was fully aware of how to use a harness, safety harness and all that, but I went on a job, and the particular contractor couldn't show that they had given safety training on a harness. Well, the guy that was doing the training took one look around and saw that who we were, and just here, sign this to say you had training on harnesses. Luckily, we didn't need it. We'd had lots of training prior to that, but we had no course that they were supposed to give. He just said, here, sign your name here. It says you've been trained.
Yeah. Well, the thing about that is that, if you've got a crew of, I don't know how many people, 50 people, and you look around and you look at each other and say you've never worked with any of those guys before, and you're all supposed to have done the safety harness training. You know what you've done, but you don't know what the quality of other people on your crew is like, do you?
Well, it's usually always the same training, and in our particular case, but there was degrees of it, and this proactive stuff wasn't really that proactive because they didn't train people well enough. They do now. They have to now. There's more eyes on it, much more eyes on it.
Yeah.
Now I've had, by the time I ended my career, I had safety training up the yin yang, and it was like lots of very good stuff. The stuff that I liked the best was how to rig, the limitations of rigging, and so on. Unfortunately, it took away some of my methods, because you couldn't use come-alongs to balance the load anymore. You had to get complicated, which in the end I thought it was probably more unsafe than safe. But anyhow, Never Trust, who I call it, and their spokesman Joyce Morocco doesn't even know anything about it yet, as the investigation continues. But the building is going on, which of course is a red flag. And I hope everybody, as Mike said, it might be an unsafe building. But I think that all eyes are on it now.
Yeah.
It's never been assured in times past, but it's a better indication that you're probably safer.
All right. Okay, moving to Gaza. Canadian Vivian Silver, we've heard about her and her her being taken as hostage. His son is staying on as her legacy in Gaza. She was taken as a hostage and was, of course, killed. We know about that.
No, she wasn't. At first, they thought she was taken as a hostage, but sometime later, they identified her DNA in the house that she lived in. She was in a safe room, and the house got burnt down.
It's a house that got burnt down. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now we don't know if there was. They don't know whether it was the terrorists, the Hamas guys that burned the house down, or it could have been a Apache helicopter missile that did it, because it seems that there was a few hundred of the hostages of the 1,200 were actually killed by friendly fire, and the highest estimate I heard was around 300. But anyway, this is a bitter, bitter, bitter irony. Now, Vivian Silver had worked tirelessly with the Palestinians close to her kibbutz. She went into the Gaza Strip, tried to get the Gazans out into better hospitals and try to help them the best they can. Tried to start the process of cohabitation with the Palestinian neighbors. She went out of her way to do all this. Her beliefs were that the Palestinians were in a bad shape, and they had never been treated fairly. And like I say, the bitterest of all ironies, she happens to be one of the victims of October 7th.
Yeah.
Whether it was Hamas or whether it was friendly fire.
Yeah, that's not being fully explained. Yeah.
But it was, of course, caused by Hamas. Now, she is the one that stepped out of her zone and saw Palestinians as an equal people, and tried very hard to work with them. And she is one that dies. And she happened to be a Canadian, by the way, too. So that's now her son. Her son is going to continue on his work. And I cannot believe this guy. He is unbelievably. I would have been enraged myself. I would have turned dark. Not this guy. Not this guy. He wants to continue his mother's work. And he has said right from the beginning, the kind of retaliation that Israel is doing is not good. It's a bad thing to do. And Jonathan Zegan is his name. And the last message that she sent to him as she was in her safe room, in her room, was, "I am with you. I feel you." And he had to wait a long time to find that his mother's DNA had been found. And yet he finds he is not full of hate and vengeance, which most of us would have been. He's saying that basically he spent there's a whole question and answer thing here. He was now doing the work of his mother. Now, if you read the article, there's a bunch of questions and answers that he talks about. But one thing he is very firm about is the kind of retaliation that Israelis are doing now won't solve anything.
Well, he's also asked about what do you think about the events of last week in Lebanon? What do you think your mother would think? I think it's more of the same, and I think we get to the point where we feel, listen, we have to defend ourselves. We're with our backs against the wall. We've been we have been bombarded in the north for 11 months, and people are displaced. We have to push. We have to push Hezbollah back militarily. And you think, right, there's sense in that, but Hezbollah leader Hussein Nasrallah himself said, "I'm going to stop shooting if the war in Gaza ends." So every military action that you can think was inevitable actually was preventable. So if you would have used diplomatic resources in advance, you would have sought Palestinian partnership instead of divide and conquer.
It is interesting to note that a little later on that there's been a lot of resistance to what's the explosion of this war. The war has been going on for a year now in Gaza, nearly a year, and
It is
Hamas is still
today,
alive.
isn't it?
Hamas was supposed to be squished within weeks.
It's
and
a
it is
year
still-
today, by the way, David.
What?
It's a year today. It's the 7th of October today.
Yes. I don't know. It was a few weeks thereafter that before the Israelis got into, but they were bombing obviously in Gaza before that. Yeah. So this is a dark day. This is where radicalized people across the border and did unmentionable things. And but the whole point of October 7th, it was a suicide mission to go into Israel to grab hostages and to attack the military bases. They thought every one of those guys was going to be a dead man. They were just trying to get some hostages because they have a lot of leverage with hostages. Unfortunately, other Palestinians crossed the border too, and they were among the ones that did a lot of the bad stuff. Were the ones that weren't connected with Hamas, although Hamas was brutal in itself. And I don't know. It was a very, very dark day. And as much criticism I'm going to get for this, it did not happen in a vacuum, as the UN guy says. This has been a long rolling thing. And as it was said back in 1967, if we keep occupying the West Bank, we are going to be oppressors, and oppressors of people begin resistance, and resistance means violence. And so we are going to end up being murderers of murderers of murderers. Basically, we'll murder one of you, you murder one of us, we'll murder one, and it will continue forever.
An endless story, yeah. And it's been a long held problem in the Middle East. And it's like people, it's been a long held problem, and really we need a solution to it.
And unfortunately, a lot of us here, and then we just think of those people over there. Things like they don't like democracy. They are enemies of democracy. Such hogwash talk.
Yes.
I mean, they have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what was set into play when Zionism began. It was just, I mean, in 1948, when the country was split in half, and actually Israel got more, there was twice as many Palestinians as there was brand new Israelis. They cut the country in half for half Palestinian and half Israeli, or in that case, at that time,
and it's Jewish. It's been growing ever since.
Well, their population has, but the fact of the matter is, when they first divided the country, they gave half of it to 1/3 of the population.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And never a situation that's going to end well.
No, and this business about, I keep hearing stuff like, well, all these people in Gaza, well, how come the Arab states won't take them as refugees? How come they won't take them as refugees? Well, for one thing, they don't want to be pushed out of their land. And another thing, Egypt or Jordan or Lebanon already have all kinds of Palestinian refugees from other wars. and all kinds of displaced Palestinians. Jordan's about 90% Palestinian. There are Palestinian refugee camps in Libya, in Syria, in Egypt, in Libya. Like there was Palestinians I worked with in Libya. So there are
pretty well every bordering country to Israel has Palestinian encampments in it somewhere.
They have quite a bit of Palestinian diaspora around the world. So when somebody says, well, the Arabs won't even take the Palestinians in as refugees, there's two things wrong with that. They've taken all kinds of them, for number one. And second of all, they want to push the Palestinians out of Gaza so they can take over Gaza. They'll never let them back in. If they said, well, why don't you put them in the Sinai for now until the war is over? Well, they know that they won't let them back in. Like 2 million Palestinians come into the Sinai, they'll never be permitted back.
Yeah. Okay. Any further thoughts on this particular interview and what her son said, Silver's son?
Only that I am amazed at this guy, and he really is cut out of the same fabric as his mother. She saw people as the same. Palestinians were not children of a lesser God, and as I said before, it's one of those bitter ironies of life, where the exact opposite person should have died. Should have been a victim of the people that she was trying to help.
Yeah.
Well, not the people so much, but a group from that or from the Gaza Strip. I'm sure if they'd known who she was, they probably would have let her go. But I don't know. It's just a terrible story all along. But I have to admire him. I don't think I would have had that ability.
It's so easy to be so angry, right?
I would have been enraged. I think it would have washed out any common sense I had in my mind, but I can't. This guy was, he was well trained by his mother. Let's put it that way. She instilled some ethics in him, some character in him. And let's hope that he is successful in the work that he carries on for his mother's name.
All right. Okay, so the next one's oddly enough interrelated. Mental health worker who didn't recognize their own mental state is talking out. So I work in mental health, and I didn't even recognize that I had compulsive thoughts, which basically that I have OCD is what they're admitting, right? So they've, as long as I can remember,
I was going to leave this one for tomorrow because I wanted to look into it a little bit more.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, and I think probably we'll go up to something. The next one down, I think is
credit card.
That was a bit complicated, and I don't think I could do it justice without looking into it a little bit more.
Okay, we can do that. All right, credit card debt is growing amongst Canadian renters.
Yeah, this is this tells us that you're supposed to be supposed to pay 1/3, basically 30% of your income on your dwelling, whether you're paying a mortgage or paying the rent. The guideline is 30% of what you're making. That is almost becoming laughable now.
Yeah,
where less and less of Canadians can find that as reasonable. They're paying much more than that. Let's say they're paying maybe 50% of their income on rent. The housing thing has got so out of hand that so out of touch with the average person that they have to use a credit card to make up the difference. Now it zooms in on a person here that says that I did some math. 30% of my pay is $966, but reality, her monthly rent is $3,200. I don't know why the rent is that high. The first thing I did was lift my eyebrows. Well, surely you can find something a little less than 3,200. But she does live a renter in Toronto, but still, she says that's not including the utilities, the hydro, and
Well,
all
I
that
want to
stuff.
know. I want to know if 30% is 966, then 3,200 is more than 100% of her income.
And that's the rub. She's starting to dip into her line of credit and her credit card. And she says she uses the line of credit to cover costs of her rental house and says she often has to prioritize pay rent and feeding her children over paying the credit card debt. My first question to her is, why do you have a place $3,200? That would be my first question to her. I'm I know rent's pretty high all in all, but surely she can get something a little bit, little less expensive, even in Toronto. She shaved $500 off that for sure. I'm sure that she can. I don't know how many kids she has, but um, she says that. But Canadian renters who face the same predicament as Smith are on the rise, according to the Bank of Canada Governor Tim Macklem in a speech at Canadian Bankers Association past September. Have you noticed that the Bank of Canada is becoming more and more of a source of everything, basically? The Bank of Canada has issued warnings
Yeah.
on productivity levels. It's issued warnings on immigration. They're the ones that raised the red flag on immigration, even though everyone knew there was a problem. The government was not obliged to do anything until the Bank of Canada raised the issue. They're now raising the issue. They see what's happening in society, that debt levels are growing, and one of the reasons
I wonder if this is something because of the governorship of Tiff Macklem, that he's looking at these things, analyzing these things, and is making statements on the behalf of Bank of Canada, looking into all of this sort of stuff, because nobody else is.
Well, we found out with Mark Carney that he had been doing similar stuff himself, and we know that Mark Carney had real reservations about Chrystia Freeland's budget, the last budget or two. He feels like Canada is not approaching the budget in the way it should. For one thing, it ignored the immigration thing that was forced on them by the Bank of Canada, basically, and there were other aspects of the economy that they had ignored in the budget. So you see, the Bank of Canada is almost becoming something like the Auditor General in a way, where it reports back to the government about what's happening in the country. And in this particular case, it is just the average person incurring a lot more debt, which is a problem. Now, this talks about people who are paying much more than they should of the 30% of their income on rent or dwelling space of one kind or another. But then it does go off to say that, well, rent is too high for one thing, but then it does go on to talk about financial literacy. And that seems to be a big problem in our society, that the people in our society are not savvy with their money. And basically it says it's not renting versus owning. Even if you look at all the renters, they're going to have a different financial pressure, she says. Basically, what the spokesperson here says is every dollar you have should have a job to do, whether it's buying your groceries, paying your rent, saving for emergency fund, or saving for that trip to Peru, once you've set your goals, you can start figuring out where your money goes. This is so true. Um, so many of the guys I worked with had credit debt up to their eyeballs, and there was no excuses for it because they made enough money uh, uh, never to have incurred that kind of debt in the first place. But they were just irresponsible with the way they used their money, and they got themselves painted into a corner over and over again. And uh, I found this one of my coworkers was making really good money, but told me that his books were unbalanced, that he couldn't understand his bank statements, and how come he couldn't get ahead. And then I had I give him a few questions for over a couple of days, and quickly discovered. I just told him, look, it doesn't make sense. You've got something you're spending on there that you're not counting on. And I said, look over everything and start seeing. And well, what he realized is he was spending lavishly on his kids and stepkids. He was giving them like $2,000 here, $3,000 there. He was just open-handed, generous. But in his mind, he didn't think of that as an expense as he would gas for the car, electricity for the house, and all that other stuff. When he tried to budget, those are the things he looked at. He forgot that he had been giving out gifts. And that is very typical of the average of so many Canadians. This financial literacy is not part of their makeup. I think it should be taught in schools basically as well. That if you the macabre principle, you make $100, you spend $99, you're happy. If you make $100 and spend $110, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah, but in any given week, there's always swings and roundabouts that you make. On many weeks you get $100, you spend 95. You get $100, you spend 95. But then there's odd weeks where you got no choice because the car needs fixing, so you earn $100 and you've got to spend 200. But because you've managed to balance the books on the other weeks, you've now got the 200 available.
Yes, exactly. And she talks about here an emergency fund to establish every dollar has its purpose, and one, of course, is dollars you set aside for emergencies in case you got a leaky roof, in case you need a brand new fridge or washing machine, a rather large expense. So to keep some aside, a buffer. But so many of us in Canada don't do that. They don't keep something for a rainy day. And unfortunately, that's putting us more and more into debt, and particularly during times where housing has skyrocketed. The amount required to live someplace has skyrocketed, and if you already have bad spending habits, it gets worse. So the people's credit card debt's growing, and that is not a good thing for the Canadian economy.
Yeah.
So says the Bank of Canada.
And of course, the other thing about this is that, rents have actually, they're basically saying here, the rent is still too high. Yes, it is. But in fact, actually, another recent study that I've seen in the past couple of weeks is showing that, in fact, rental prices are coming down again. Not very fast, but they are coming down again.
Yeah, but then again, the interest rate has come down too, so there might be more incentive for people to buy who've got a little bit more money to buy more and more houses and take them off the market and rent them instead. This is look. By the time not one of my sons has a house. I was just talking to the manager of a store, and he's doing quite well. His kids will never get a house. He said they can't get that kind of money. My 3 sons have never owned a home, They actually got to the point where they could buy a house just as everything was spiking up, and then they couldn't come close out thereafter. And I owned, by the time I was the age of my youngest, I had already owned a couple of properties.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, not everybody in your generation would have owned properties. Many would have rented.
Almost everybody I know owned. Every one of my friends owned a house.
Hmm.
Yeah, they started out renting, of course, and then especially the people that say they got married in their mid-20s and that, they begin by renting, saving a little bit money, and then they could put a down payment. Just about everybody I knew had a house.
Well, you see, it's the same with kind of where I was, because I was renting for probably 4 or 5 years. I then got enough money with a couple of people. Well, one person who I used to work with and his colleague. We put the money together in order to for 3 of us to buy a house together. Right?
Yeah. Well, the first house I bought with my brother.
Yeah. So then I moved out, and they basically bought my share. They bought my share out, so I had enough money to move into a new house, and that was it. That was interesting. So I had my own apartment more than a house, upper part of a house, and that was interesting. And essentially, yeah, you get you just basically move up, you get what you can afford, right?
Yeah, I don't think I'm not so sure that's going to be an option for too many people. For one thing, you have to know if you buy a house with somebody.
And Chris, of course, will say you need to actually live with, you need to consider a life that is actually sharing facilities with other people. That's one of the things that you'll see Chris Simone talk about.
Well, I boarded rooms a few times, and that's basically what we did. You had a room, and then you had common use of the bathrooms and the cooking facilities and the common room.
Okay.
However, anyway,
Peter Biker says. Says Tim Horton sells a lazy lifestyle along with its donuts. Line up at the drive-thru is all the proof you need. Right. Okay. So we're kind of more or less finished at that, because I think you have to get off and do your collections. Just wanted to let you know I'm not going to be available on Friday, so there's not going to be a show on Friday. All right.
I'd just like to announce too that as a final thing that the Staples School Supply Drive ended yesterday, and our club was the second best in all of Ontario. There's something like 200 Staples stores in Ontario. We collected $7,579, which is $3,300 more than our best year ever. Our best year ever was the year before last, where we got $6,200. And we've beat that by 3,000, half again, basically. We've 50% more than we've had back in 2022. So we have had an exceptional year, and we hope to put that money to good use. And it's just a big thank you out there for everybody that donated, and we really show our community spirit.
Yeah.
Well, without further ado, okay, thank you.
Well done.
Without further ado, I bid you adieu. Pray for peace